McGallagher to Stokes, who's onside. 1-0.
Here's Sims. It's a good serve this from Southampton. They could finish the job here. It's Shane Long, and he has done it. Just a minute to play. That's stoppage time. Here's Letizia. Who better to say farewell than one of the finest players ever to wear the red and white.
So, hello and welcome to another episode of the Saints FC podcast. You may notice if you're watching on the YouTube channel that Tom has morphed into a different human being. Sat next to me today I have James White, who, if those of you listened to the rather drunken episode that we had at the end of last season, which we recorded in the pub during the Saints versus Swansea game, you might recognise his voice. Welcome onto the show, James.
Thank you very much, John. Pleasure to be here, evening all. Looking forward to my very first podcast.
James, I'm just going to do a little bit of my kind of standard welcome stuff. So, I mean, obviously, if you want to get in contact with the Saints FC podcast, one of the easiest ways to do that is Twitter. We're at Saints FC Podcast, or you can email us, saintsfcpodcast@gmail.com. You can also put comments in the YouTube channel on The Ugly Inside. Rate us on iTunes, whatever you want to do. Tell a friend, tweet about it. Anyway, we're going to be going through some of your emails, tweets and comments a little bit later on. So if you have communicated with us in the last couple of weeks, hold on, because you might hear us and our thoughts on what you've had to say. But first thing, kind of like welcoming James to the podcast. James, I'm really keen to know, why is it that you support Southampton?
Well, I'm born and bred in Winchester. Went to my first game when I was hooked immediately. I think it was 1990-91. It wasn't a great game. I think it was against Wimbledon, last game of the season. But I get to go on a pitch. And then from then I was pretty much hooked from then. So obviously there's been lots of ups and downs over the years. I supported Saints those 5 years, but still to this day. But I can't think of a better team to support, to be honest.
So I wonder if you can take us through some of those moments that you might remember, if you can think back all the way to the early 1990s? Yeah. So think back to the early 1990s and tell us about what the experience is of going to watch Saints for the first time. We had a couple of guests who got to experience their first Saints game last season. People who travelled over from America. So I'd be keen to hear, what's your kind of misty childhood memory of the day?
I'd imagine it's a lot different to what it is today. There's no fun fairs or ice creams or anything like that. But it was just the sense of everybody walking to the ground in the same direction, everybody talking about the game, going to the Milton Road, which is my first game, but I couldn't see, so I had to stand in a milk box and things like that. So, and just the atmosphere is a bit more raw, I think, back in those days, because you could stand up, obviously. But it was just the excitement of a child, seeing everybody excited when they go, and that feeling, and that feeling's still there today. And hopefully that's the same for people going to games for the first time in this day and age in the Premier League.
Who knows? I mean, do you remember? Were there any goals in that game? Can you remember what happened or what that was like? You're shaking your head, so yeah. Okay. We'll leave that bit out then, I think, and we'll move straight on to Sunday's game. So, had the first game of the season against Burnley. If you're a Saints fan and you're listening to this and you somehow haven't checked out the result, that was 0-0. 0-0 at home to Burnley. I think that's a result which probably won't necessarily surprise people. Some people might be a bit disappointed with it. Some people a bit less so. I mean, Saints traditionally don't start the season particularly well, but how did you think Saints did in the opening parts of that game, James?
I thought we started very slowly. I think the players look a little bit nervous. I think Hughes alluded to it in his interview afterwards, saying there might still be a little bit of a hangover from last season, a little bit of anxiety as well, which I think you could clearly see in the first, definitely 20 minutes. I think Burnley controlled the game for large parts of the first half. I'm not sure if that was down to the formation or it was just the players, like I said, having a bit of anxiety with the new season. I think Burnley looked a little bit sharper than us, obviously with the Europa League games they've had, but we looked a lot like the worst parts of last season in the first half, and it didn't look we've improved or changed, but obviously that changed in the second half.
So, I mean, I've had quite a lot of people complaining about the way we set up. So, perhaps being at home to Burnley, you wouldn't expect us to set up with, 3 centre-backs. Perhaps that's a formation you might expect us if we're playing slightly stronger opposition. And it was funny in the first half, I don't think we used the formation to its strength. So one of the things which I noticed is quite often when we'd be pushing forward, Cedric would be in acres of space on the right-hand side of the pitch. But we didn't seem to have the kind of player with the vision to actually take advantage of that and, knock a kind of 40-yard cross-ball pass and suddenly open up the game and give Cedric a chance, to get a cross in whilst the players kind of rush on. And it just looked like it kind of didn't quite work. And I don't know what you thought about Cedric and Bertrand, but obviously when you have like 5 at the back, you're relying on your wing backs to be pushing forward and being a creative outlet and joining the attacks and using that as your way to kind of, I suppose, be dangerous or cause the opposition damage.
I personally think the main problem in the first half is, which has happened probably the last 2 seasons since Koeman left, is we're not moving the ball quick enough. We're not passing it forward quick enough, and it allows the defence to get back into shape. And like you said, the width was there, but we're not moving the ball quick enough to use that width. And by the time they've noticed Bertrand and Cedric in acres of space, the opposition have closed down that space. I think that's been a problem the last 2 years. We're not moving it quick enough. And there's not really anybody who can bring the ball through midfield with a bit of pace, which I've noticed. And when you do play 2 holding midfielders, it's hard for that to happen, and which also happens where you don't have many people arriving in a box, which hopefully Armstrong will do. But that's been my main criticism the last 2 seasons, is not passing the ball quick enough, lack of pace, and people arriving in the box.
Yeah, I totally agree. On the 2 holding midfielders seemed quite strange, and it did look like we lacked that kind of creative outlet in that part of the pitch. And I thought one of the things I was discussing with my brother is perhaps one of the problems why we have 2 players in that kind of position with Romeo and Lamina is because Victor Wanyama was such a beast that he could kind of do that role that those 2 players do on his own. And Lamina's an interesting player because he can be quite exciting going forwards, and he takes the ball around players quite well. He's very strong, but I suppose he doesn't have that kind of, that more kind of visionary that kind of like visionary style that you might expect from a kind of deep-lying central midfielder. I mean, Saints were rumoured to be looking at Danny Drinkwater, and perhaps that would have been a better kind of deep-lying midfielder to have in that position, because you could potentially have Romeo breaking up the play, giving it to Drinkwater then distributing, and then perhaps we would actually be able to make better use of Cedric or Bertrand. It didn't quite work. And I suppose the other thing as well, which I've been a little bit surprised of, and I think this could well be a confidence thing, is Wesley Hoot. When I first saw him play in the game away to Palace last season, he was pinging beautiful kind of like 60-foot balls across Selhurst Park. And I think, he's quite nervous now. I don't think he's got the confidence to try that sort of thing, which he did when he first joined Saints.
No, I completely agree. I was at the Palace game as well, and I thought him and Lamine on that day were absolutely outstanding, but we've not seen that from him since then. He looks like Bambi on ice at times. He looks like he's got 2 left feet. I think it's clearly a confidence issue as well. I'm not sure even 3 at the backs helped him that much. He looked actually more confident yesterday when it was 2 at the back. 4 across, I think he looks much better actually. But I think you're right, it's definitely a confidence issue. And also, I know Van Dijk's a special player, but when we had Van Dijk, he would spray those passes out of defence very quickly, so put us on the front foot. We haven't got that in a moment. I did notice Vestergaard bring the ball out a few times yesterday into midfield, which is what we need because we've been so pedestrian at times, which I've alluded to already. But hopefully Hoyt's confidence with that clean sheet as well, because we didn't keep many clean sheets last season, so hopefully that will bring the confidence for the whole of the back.
Yeah, I hope so. And then, I've got to be honest, I was actually quite surprised when I saw, Wesley Hoop, Jack Stevens were both kind of starting in the centre of defence. I was half expecting it to be Vestergaard, Bednarek and Yoshida. And Bednarek and Yoshida, I suppose, purely based on, Bednarek, the end of last season, and then his performances at the World Cup were brilliant. Yoshida looked like he actually learnt quite a lot in the World Cup and stepped up almost to a level kind of that he's only shown on very kind of brief moments in Southampton. So, I mean, I don't know, were you surprised at all with the formation and the lineup or the personnel that was in it when the lineup was announced?
I wasn't surprised by the formation because he's been going with that towards the latter part of last season, all pre-season, so he hasn't really mixed that up that much. People that know me know that I'm probably Yoshida's biggest critic over the last 4 or 5 years. But I thought he had a great World Cup, and he has learned a lot, I'd say, the last 2 years. And he has cut out those mistakes that he used to make quite often. So I was surprised that he wasn't even on the bench. I'm still, Julie said that one for me for Bednarek. I'm not really sure. I think he has got a mistake in him. I do like Steve. I think he's come on a lot the last year. But I probably would have thought Yoshida would have started yesterday.
Yeah, and he wasn't even on the bench. So, I mean, I don't know if there's a little bit of a hangover from the World Cup. Maybe he's not quite match ready. But, we saw across the whole Premier League lots and lots of players that played in the World Cup right to the kind of final weekend. Lots of them doing quite well, some of them not doing so well. So, I mean, who knows? Obviously, the coaching staff know a lot more than us, and perhaps, that's why the decisions were being made. I mean, from the first half, and I probably kind of quite want to quickly move on from the first half because it wasn't the most beautiful stuff. Were there any players that kind of caught your eye that you thought, actually, they're looking pretty good, they're looking pretty lively? Let's hear your thoughts on who kind of stood out for you in the first half. Alex McCarthy, obviously, because he made a few really good saves in that first half, and he actually kept us in it, to be honest, in the first half. Armstrong, I thought, made some really good runs, very positive going forward, put some good challenges, and he was pressing pretty well, which a lot of the team wasn't doing. So the two outstanding for the first half is definitely McCarthy and Armstrong, and it's a shame that Armstrong had to go off in the second half, I thought. Right, let's move on to the second half then, because I was going to say the only two people I was going to pick out were Armstrong and McCarthy. So it's not going to add too much to the conversation if I just repeat what you've said. So the second half started, and we started better in the second half, but really I thought the turning point for Saints was actually Armstrong, who'd been the best player for Saints up until that point, maybe with the exception of McCarthy, got injured. And you might have thought at this point, oh no, what are we going to do? But Mark Hughes really, I suppose, kind of took the ball by the horns. He made a double substitution. He totally changed the style of Saints play. So he took Armstrong off, who was injured, took off Cedric as well. And suddenly, Saints looked a lot better. I mean, what did you make of his changes?
It's very positive because I think the last 2 seasons we've been used to changes being made far too late. I think it was after 55 minutes he made that double substitution. But immediately, I think the crowd had a big lift when Ings came on as well. I think obviously a home boy coming back, everybody excited to see him. I think he wanted the ball, which is a bit different. So he came deep, he got the ball, he made things happen, and his movement's very, very good. Just brought a different dimension to the game, and Redmond became more involved in the game as well. I think he was pretty poor in the first half. So I think his confidence came up as well, and the changes gave the whole stadium a lift. We were pressing more in different positions. I'm not sure if Burnley maybe tired a little bit towards the end because they've had quite a lot of football recently, but I think it's more to do with Saints changing the style of play, formation, and a bit more desire and a lot more forward creative players on the pitch.
So I'm going to talk about a couple of our players who have been with Saints for a little while now. So Nathan Redmond and Charlie Austin, who I thought both kind of looked okay up until the point when the substitution came on. And then when Danny Ings came on, I thought Charlie Austin suddenly looked like he was putting in a little bit more effort. And when Elyounoussi came on, Redmond suddenly looked like a little bit of the kind of shackles had come off him. He suddenly was a bit more creative. He was taking on players. And by the end of the game, I was kind of ready to give Redmond man of the match, which, up until that point, you would have said, well, there were a few flashes, but ultimately he'd been the kind of frustrated player that we saw last season. Is that just because it's competition? Because, Ings is quite a similar player to Charlie Austin. And Elyounoussi and Redmond, they're both attacking, creative forwards. Was that the reason why suddenly they both improved when they came on? Or was it just the fact that, a bit of the workload was being shared and therefore they felt slightly less pressure?
I think it's a bit of the workload being shared because Austin up front in his zone against two big centre-backs is not going to work. He's never going to win in the air. He's never really going to run beyond them either. He hasn't got the pace to do that. So Austin's brilliant in the box, but he's not going to do a lot outside the box. So I think Ings coming deep, as well as being a goal scorer, I thought he sort of put a few decent balls in there for Austin and other players in the box. Redmond, he's a very frustrating player for me because you can see potential in him. He just seems a little bit reluctant to take people on. Sometimes he goes backwards when he's clearly got the pace to do so. And he did show that in the second half. First half, he was a completely different player. So I think there's a confidence thing with him as well. I think he's a bit like Walcott used to be. He just doesn't need to think. If he doesn't think, I think he's a relatively good player. But it's when he starts to think about things, his decision making is very poor.
So I've got an interesting stat, and I have to thank my brother for pointing this one out to me, because quite a lot of people are quite excited about seeing Ings and Austin linking up together, because they obviously played together as strikers at Burnley. Now, when they were playing together at Burnley, Charlie Austin had 2 full seasons there, managed to get 17 goals in 2011-12, and then 28 goals from 40 appearances in 12-13, which is obviously absolutely fantastic record, and my God, wouldn't it be great if we got somewhere close to that. Danny Ings, he had a couple of seasons with Burnley alongside Charlie Austin where he got 3 goals in each season. The first season he played 15 games, second season he played 33, which obviously is not a great return. But actually when Austin left, he then scored 26 goals for Burnley in the following season. So is there a bit of a concern that these two players are a bit too similar? Or is that actually quite a good thing because, Charlie Austin is probably the better finisher of the two, and actually having someone like Ings means that when Charlie Austin does get injured, you can throw him into the team without there really being too much adaptation from the rest of the squad?
I think the main difference between the two is Ings' movement is a lot better than, or he's more mobile than Austin. We could see that on Sunday. He was across the line, left, right, in the centre, and coming deep for the ball. Austin doesn't really do that. So I think I had to see a lot of him in the Championship when he was at Burnley in his heyday, and obviously been injured for quite a lot of the last 2 seasons, but his movement has definitely improved. I'm not sure if that's been down to Klopp, I don't know, but he wants the ball more than he used to, I think, and I think he's got quite a big personality, and I think wanting the ball and demanding the ball is going to help us in the future, because a lot of our players sometimes do go into their shell when the times are hard. So whilst they are very similar, I think I also think that Ings is a little bit different in terms of he will work the channels and he will come deeper, and I think he'll have a lot more assists than... I'm interested to see what the assist stats would be. You probably haven't got those, but for Ings over those seasons, because I bet he's had a lot of assists over his career, rather than a great goal record like Charlie Austin's got.
Yeah, I think they're interesting points. I mean, on your point about Ings being more mobile than Charlie Austin, I think there's a lot of people that are a bit more mobile than Charlie Austin. And to be honest, I was a bit surprised about how immobile he looks. I mean, perhaps I shouldn't be that surprised, because even at the end of last season he was really flagging kind of once he got beyond 60 minutes, but you'd have thought maybe with a pre-season he could have worked on his condition a little bit more. It still astonishes me that you can be that talented that it doesn't really matter that even though you're being paid a fortune to be a professional athlete, you don't have to look after yourself in perhaps the same way that most professional athletes do. And on that point, actually, so, I mean, I thought Redmond looked a lot better in the second half, and I think he looked a bit sharper. Apparently, he spent his summer before pre-season on kind of a fitness training camp. So, I mean, did you hear about that? Do you think it's made a difference for Redmond?
Not on the first half showing, no. The second half, like I said, he was a lot better. I think it's all in his mind rather than the fitness thing, to be honest.
To be honest, I suppose that could be quite welcome, if Redmond's got his mind sorted out, because I do think the kind of confidence side of things can be quite problematic. So I don't know if there are any kind of particular chances or opportunities or moments of play that you thought kind of looked quite positive and that Saints could kind of be quite hopeful for in the future. I mean, we didn't get a goal, which was quite frustrating. We saw Joe Hart make some saves, which was surprising and also annoying. But is there anything that you thought maybe we could pick out and say, actually, that could be really effective in the rest of the season going forward?
I thought Elanusi was very direct as well when he came on. So I'd like to see him start for the next few games. I probably would have him over Redmond in the starting 11. I think if you've seen him in the Champions League for Basel, he was very good, very direct, especially against Man City. And he has got, from what I've seen, he actually has got an end product, which Redmond hasn't. So with Tadic not being anymore, we need somebody like that. I think Armstrong brings that as well. But I think that we need to be more direct and we need a bit more pace in the side to have that. But in terms of yesterday's chances, a lot of them came from corners, from Elanusi's delivery. A lot of the balls in the box from Ings. And Stevens got down the right quite well towards the latter part of the game. He almost scored himself. But it was just more pressure and there's more people in the box. I think that's what created the chances we had yesterday. There wasn't many clear-cut chances, I don't think. I mean, probably the best one was, I think it was Ben Mee, I think was a header towards the goal, which they cleared off the line. And Stevens was the only other clear-cut chance, I'd say. But we didn't create a huge amount. It's more down to pressure and bodies in the box, I think, from yesterday.
I mean, that's an interesting point you brought up Stevens there, because he came into right back, and perhaps you would have thought when Hughes made that double substitution, he would actually take off one of the centre backs and leave Cedric on there, who's obviously a bit more experienced at playing right back. I mean, he did quite well, but his crossing isn't anywhere near as good as Cedric's. But you're right, he did get himself into a couple of dangerous positions at the end, and I think his confidence grew as the second half wore on. He got much more into, I suppose, that right back, right wing back sort of position. Interesting you mentioning that our chances came from corners and Elanusi's delivery. I mean, could there be an argument that actually James Ward-Prowse might be an answer to Southampton's right back, right wing back kind of question? I mean, Cedric wasn't great. I know he can be better, but he can also be quite suspect. If we are going to play the 3-5-2 a little bit more, do you think James Ward-Prowse we might finally find a regular position for him after all these years?
I did mention that to a couple of my friends, actually. Said it wasn't going to be fit for the opening game to put Ward-Prowse there, because I don't think a left footer as a right wing back is the answer. I know Target had a good game, a good half in that pre-season friendly, but it was only a friendly. James Ward-Prowse is a very frustrating player. He hasn't got any pace at all. I'm not sure his defensive duties are that good either, but there's no doubting his delivery. Yeah. So I don't know. I think the reason Cedric got taken off yesterday because he's had no pre-season at all. I think wing back's probably the better position for Cedric, because his defensive responsibilities sometimes can be a bit suspect due to his height, I think, more than anything. I think he's very good going forward. I'm not sure James Ward-Prowse is the answer to a right wing back, though.
Fair enough. So obviously based on yesterday, what's our best formation?
Well, if you've gone yesterday's evidence, I mean, it was clearly when he changed it to the 4-4-2. But that's not to say it's going to work in every game. It was quite negative in the first half, but I'm not sure that's necessarily in the formation. I think the players were a little bit on edge, as I mentioned already, because 3-5-2 worked under Koeman very well. But but it's good to have the options. You know, we play different teams have different tactics. So one of the criticisms I've had the last few seasons, we've not changed that when we've been struggling to break down teams. We've not changed the formation, we've stick to it and just changed the personnel, which sometimes doesn't work. 3-5-2 probably would have worked better away from home, and if you can get them on a counter. But you know, when we were very successful, we were playing the 4-3-3, which isn't actually my favourite formation. So whether we've got the personnel to do it now, I don't know. But 4-3-3 probably would be my preferred choice, and I think we have got the players to do that. But the 3-5-2 at the moment, it's a very sexy choice, isn't it? Because of everybody's doing it. So it seems that that's what Hughes wants to do, but he may change his mind after the second half showing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I actually think that's probably the best thing that we can say about Mark Hughes after the first game of the season was his willingness to change things when it was clear that we weren't going to win the game playing 3-5-2. And you're right, you know, we went 3-5-2, we went 4-4-2, then we had the change of personnel, we had Gabbiadini on, and you know, we had Redmond and Ananusi pushing forward. There was a lot of variety in there, a lot of tactical variety, and I don't think it's the kind of tactical variety that suggests that Hughes doesn't know what he's doing. All of it felt quite deliberate, and it all had, you know, quite an impact on the game every time he switched things around. So I think that's going to be really, really positive. I think one of my worries would be if we were playing against a side with a little bit more quality than Burnley, maybe we would have seen, you know, we might have been punished a bit earlier, but, you know, McCarthy kept us in it. You know, it was one of those games. I think I predicted a draw in last week's podcast, and I think at the end of the season nobody's going to look back and think actually that 0-0 at Burnley is what cost us, you know, the season that we should have had. On Sunday, so yesterday as we're recording, we had 4 new debutants. So we had Stuart Armstrong, we had Danny Ings, we had Mohamed Elanusi, and we had Yannick Vestergaard. I mean, what's your take on how those 4 players performed? Let's start from the back. So start with Vestergaard. What did you make of his performance?
I thought it was a very promising performance, considering Burnley are very physical. Well, you know, he's very physical as well, but in the Bundesliga, it's a very different animal to the Premier League. So I thought he kept very well with Chris Wood up there. He threw himself into everything. He was good in the box as well. I saw a long throw, which I've not seen since Roy Delap in the first half. But that was quite funny. But I thought he was very commanding, he was very brave, and he did, even though probably distribution is not his best asset, I think he did try and bring the ball into midfield. And he's very composed and assured at the back, which we have been lacking since Van Dijk's gone already. We've been lacking that sort of composure at the back, which has panicked the whole defence and has led to unnecessary goals. But I thought it was a very good debut by him. I know a lot of the papers and various media outlets have given him man of the match for yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally understand why he would be up there for man of the match. It was a very assured performance at the back. He maybe doesn't quite have that level of class that Van Dijk has, but, you know, Van Dijk is now the world's most expensive defender. But, you know, maybe he's going to grow into that position. He'll get used to the Premier League. One of the things I really enjoyed was after he got elbowed, and there was nothing given for it. I think he suddenly kind of rechecked what he thought. So obviously in the Bundesliga you can get away with something else. He got elbowed in the head, didn't get anything given for him. So he then led with his elbow into the back. I can't remember if it was Chris Wood or someone else, but my God, he absolutely clattered the poor guy, just left him in pieces on the floor. And that was quite amusing to see. And it's nice to see that we've got a player who's willing to kind of give it back as much as they're going to get it. And it actually reminded me of the conversation I had with Michael Svensson, who another Scandinavian defender, and he was telling me about once he figured out what he could get away with, he liked giving it out and dishing it out in the Premier League games. Another thing I quite enjoyed was his sliding tackle, which he did in the second half as Burnley were attacking. It seemed almost to happen in slow motion, but he's so long and big. When he got himself in the way of the ball, there was no way that the Burnley attacker was ever going to get it past him. And that was quite amusing to see. You know, I think some people said he has a bit of a slow turning circle, but if an oil tanker comes in the way of a tugboat, it's still going to block it, regardless of what speed the tugboat can go. So I suppose the next one is Stuart Armstrong. We mentioned him before, but let's shine the spotlight on him a bit more. What do you make of Stuart Armstrong? What sort of player do you think he's going to be for Saints this season?
I really like Stuart Armstrong. I think he's going to be one of the bargains of the season, to be honest, at £7 million. What I like about him, as soon as he gets the ball, he heads up, he either drives forward or he looks for the forward pass. He's also got a goal in him as well. So whilst it was a shame he went off yesterday, we did improve when he went off. I don't think that was anything to do with necessarily his performance. I thought it was very encouraging, his first half performance, and one of the few highlights of the first half. But I suppose he's there he's more of a more attacking Stephen Davis, I suppose, replacing him. But I'm excited to see what he does for the season, because I think he's going to add a few goals and a few assists. And like I said, I think it's going to be a real steal at £7 million.
Tom last week was banging on about his hair. What did you think of that? You've got quite a thick, illustrious hairdo yourself, James. If you're listening to this on iTunes or Spotify, you might want to get over onto the YouTube Ugly Inside channel and see James's hair. Quite thick and luxurious. As a man with a thick and luxurious haircut, do you admire someone like Stuart Armstrong, or do you kind of envy him?
I think he's got a bit of a wavy look, so it's better. His hair probably must be better than mine. But I think it's a bit more envy, actually. Even when he goes down the challenge, it's still in place.
Haircuts aside, I thought Stuart Armstrong was the highlight of the first half for Saints. And I remember saying to the guy behind me in the Northern Med, that I thought, he was going to be a bargain. £7 million seems a bit of a snip. I do wonder if that injury, as soon as he got the knock and he went down, they immediately got prepared for the substitution. So I don't know if he is carrying an injury that they know about, and that's perhaps why we got him on the kind of bargain basement prices. I wouldn't sniff at £7 million, but in the Premier League, that isn't an awful lot these days. So we'll move further up the pitch to Mohamed Elyounoussi. Moroccan-born Norwegian player with a bit of a Swiss experience. He's played in the Champions League, you mentioned earlier. When I read about him, it seemed like he was the player brought in to replace Tadic. Having watched him, I think he's actually quite a different player from Tadic, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a little bit different to Tadic. I think he's a bit more direct and, to actually slow the ball down and then get it in the box. But I think he's a bit more dribbling towards players rather than stopping and crossing. He's probably the most, before Ings came, that's probably the most exciting signing for me, because he's young, he's very direct, which you needed, and he's brave on the ball. We don't a lot of people, I think, last season went missing. I don't think that you're going to see that from him. I think he's going to want to try and make something happen. Create a lot, and I think he's going to add a few goals as well, and I'd like to see him start ahead of Redmond against Everton.
I quite enjoyed having him and Redmond on the pitch at the same time, because I think probably both of those players worry defenders, and so if you have them on the pitch at the same time, if you have someone who's got decent distribution, I'd perhaps lose one of our central defensive midfielders. I'm not entirely sure Mark Hughes will do that, but I think, perhaps if we're on the front foot, if we've got a team under the cosh, having both Redmond and Elyounoussi on, who are both willing to run and dribble with the ball, I think it could be great. I do think we are still perhaps missing, you mentioned that Stuart Armstrong, you think, is probably a replacement for Stephen Davis, and I think I agree with that. But Tadic, you're right, he did sometimes slow the game down, but also he had that ability to unlock defences in those kind of like slow and turgid games. Have we replaced Tadic's ability to do that? It's something that Lallana was great at, and obviously Tadic was brought in to replace Lallana. I thought Elyounoussi was a replacement for Tadic. Do you think this could be maybe one point of weakness we could have this season?
Maybe, but I don't think we replaced Mane either. So, and that's probably, for me, more concerning if we've got a lack of pace for the other side. So if Elyounoussi can bring a bit more pace, then I prefer that than a Tadic style player anyway, because the Premier League is now all about pace, hitting people from the counter-attack, which we've not had the last 2 years. So if Elyounoussi can bring a bit more pace than Tadic had, then that's probably a better move for me anyway.
Okay, so then we're moving on to our fourth and final debutant yesterday, is Danny Ings. I saw circulating on social media, he's got one of those bricks at St Mary's and it says Daniel Ings, fan forever. He seemed absolutely delighted to be joining Saints and from Liverpool, which is, such a fantastic thing. I think it kind of eases some of that pain from all these players that have been so delighted to leave Saints to join Liverpool. You mentioned you're really excited about him joining Saints. What is it that gets you so excited about Danny Ings?
I think it's, he wants to play for Saints, which I think a lot of fans have criticised the players over the last couple of years, the desire of the team. So you're not going to have to question that. Danny Ings, I know his desire to play for Saints. He's clearly a hometown boy and he loves Saints a bit. So that's not going to be a question for him. But it's more his movement in the box and his ability to get in behind, his movement, which we've lacked over the last couple of years. I mean, Gabardini's got great movement as well, don't get me wrong, but I think Ings is probably a little bit more direct than Gabardini, and he can run them behind, which I don't think Gabardini can do. I don't think he's got the pace to do that. Out of the four, I'm probably most excited to see Ings, and I was very encouraged by his sort of performance yesterday in the last sort of 35-40 minutes. I thought it was very encouraging. I think he made things happen.
Yeah, I thought, to be honest, all four players look like, fairly decent strengthening of the squad. I was quite upset to lose Tadic. I know a lot of fans find him quite frustrating, but I always thought that level of skill was always very, very useful in the Premier League. But it looks like with Armstrong, Ings, Elyounoussi and Vestergaard, we've got a really good group of new players coming in. I thought Charlie Austin and Redmond were both improved when they came in. So it's probably not a bad thing to have a bit of competition for places, have the players, really got to fight for their position. You mentioned you'd like to see Redmond dropped for the next game and Elyounoussi brought in. I actually thought Redmond, well, he got the man of the match from me, which is making you kind of like chuckle. Redmond really is a Marmite player. I mean, I put Jekyll and Hyde down, which I thought about his performance because I thought, first half he was really quite poor. In the second half, I thought he was our best player and certainly caused the most trouble on the pitch, and certainly he seemed to be the one that was worrying Burnley the most. Having kind of looked at that, what do you think Saints' best starting 11 would be? If you were in Mark Hughes' shoes, having seen a couple of the pre-season games, having watched Saints Burnley, knowing what some of the players that were dropped from the squad can do, what do you reckon Saints' best 11 would be?
I think the 3-5-2 does work quite well at the moment where we get our confidence back. So I think he probably should stick to that at the moment. But I think in terms of keeper, there's no question McCarthy is number one. And until he makes a mistake, I don't think that's going to change. I think centre back, I think he's not good. I think Hoyt, he's left-footed. It's good to play into the back of the left of the back three, and Vestergaard, and probably I do like Jack Stevens because he's good on the ball. And now we've got Vestergaard. We were lacking a little bit of height at the back, so I think I'd like to see Stevens there because I'm not Yoshida's biggest fan. I never will be. West had a good World Cup. He's still got a massive mistake in him every game. The wing backs speak for themselves with Cedric and Bertrand. On our day, they're our most dangerous outlet, to be honest. Certainly Bertrand if his mind's in the game. I do like Lemina has to start for me because whilst he's inconsistent, he can change the game. He can bring us through midfield. I probably would drop Romeo, to be honest, and put Højbjerg in there because Højbjerg can also get the ball forward. And his whilst Romeo's got desire as well, I think Højbjerg has got a forward pass in him. I think Romeo looks to pass it backwards or sideways before he looks to go forward. And I'd probably like to see. I'm not sure I'd play two up front. I'd probably play Ings down the middle with Armstrong and Elyounoussi.
So Redmond, goodbye. Charlie Austin, goodbye. Gabbiadini doesn't get a look in. Oriol Romeo, player of the season a couple of years ago, and you've dropped him as well. Yoshida, who had all those, won those hearts and minds in the World Cup, and Bednarek, who even got a goal in the World Cup and a man of the match performance. None of them getting a look in. James Ward-Prowse is been that 7 for years. I mean, for those of you watching on YouTube, we'll be able to see James sat next to me kind of grimacing and shaking his head as I'm talking about all of these players. Interesting choice. I'd almost forgotten about Højbjerg, but you're right. I think actually maybe the weakest point in Mark Hughes' selection was that Lamina-Romeo combination in the kind of central defensive midfielders. I'd like to see something a little bit more positive for that. And Romeo, whilst I kind of like joking and prodding you in terms of saying, he was our player of the season a couple of years ago, but maybe Romeo is the kind of player who you need more when the whole rest of the side are kind of swirling around, much more attacking. He's the person that you have in the middle that allows all of that to happen. But he's not as good as Wanyama, and I don't think he ever will be. And it's a real shame. And I agree that Lamina gives us some kind of creative outlet as well. But yeah, you're right. I think Højbjerg in there would be interesting. Also, I still want to see Josh Sims given a chance, but he wasn't even in the first team squad. So, I mean, that doesn't really seem to be happening. I mean, maybe I need to forget my love affair with Josh Sims. And I'd love to see, Jake Hesketh as well, perhaps being kind of in and around that first team. But I think when you have the signings of players like Elyounoussi and Armstrong, it's tough. It's hard to see where those potential opportunities are going to be for those players that have been creating a lot of excitement in the under-23s, under-21s and under-19s, where they're going to get their opportunities. But I mean, to be honest, I tend to agree with most of what you have in that selection. I think maybe our back threes would be slightly different. I'd probably I think Bednarek could grow into be a really, really good player, and I still don't trust Hoot, and I still don't fully trust Stevens as well. He has shown glimmers of being that kind of like quite creative central defender. So, I can see why you might want to stick with him. After Sunday, have your expectations for the season changed at all? And I mean, I don't know what your expectations were before Sunday, but perhaps you can kind of give us your thoughts on that.
Not particularly. I thought we'd be between 14th and 10th, and that's not really changed. I think there's a lot worse teams than us in the Premier League, but I don't think we're going to be top 8. I think if we're anywhere between 14th and 10th, I think that's a good season. It's a recovery, and then the next season hopefully we can kick on even more. I think it's more stabilising this season, getting the players blooded in. I think 12th is where we're probably going to be, and after Sunday that's not really changed my opinion.
So you're not anticipating a relegation battle? Or, I mean, I suppose the thing with 10th to 14th is you can kind of be involved in a relegation battle, but it's suggesting that perhaps you've got things sorted out a couple of games before the end of the season. I think if we are going to finish in that bracket, I'd like to see our business get done early, because it's one thing finishing 14th when you know that you've been safe since Christmas, but, having, finishing 14th and not being safe till about 2 games from the end of the season can be quite nerve-wracking. I suppose I agree with you. I think we're going to finish bang in the middle of the table. I think I predicted 9th, but that's probably on the optimistic end. I do tend to be quite optimistic. Anyway, I think we've done Saints Burnley probably all the justice we can. I mean, I was hoping that we're going to get a chance to talk about lots of goals, but that hasn't happened. So I'm going to get on to our listener correspondence, and Nate Dogg has taken to YouTube to tell us about what he thought about our season preview. One of the things that he really talks about is Buffon. And he doesn't. Basically, I think Nate Dogg is quite frustrated with the Saints fan base and their opinions on players. So he thinks that Buffon, he's young, he's clearly talented, and that basically we should just kind of like deal with that sort of attitude problem. And he mentions, players like Roy Keane, Cristiano Ronaldo, Peter Schmeichel, who've all played for Manchester United and were dealt with by Alex Ferguson. He got the best out of those players. I mean, what do you think about Buffon? I mean, his record wasn't that great at Saints, but he didn't have a huge amount of opportunities, but perhaps his personality got in the way of him getting more opportunities. I mean, and the other thing Nate Dogg is surprised about is why Saints fans are so much more kind of endeared towards the likes of Redmond, Davis, and I mean, he goes on a great big rant about James Ward-Prowse. I mean, if you want to read the whole thing, it's proper essay length. Get over to the Ugly Inside YouTube channel. You can read it all. What do you make of his comments?
Buffal's a very frustrating player. He's clearly got talent and abundance of skill, but it's clearly his attitude doesn't match his talent, and that goes for a lot of players, not just players at Southampton. That goes for worldwide, really. He's had three managers, and every single manager had the same sort of opinion on him, so there must be something fundamentally wrong with his attitude. But then if you look at his stats, how many assists and goals has he had? He has played a lot of games, granted a lot of off the bench, but what has he actually contributed apart from goal last season? What has he actually done? I think every Saints fan wanted him to do well because you could clearly see his skill. Southampton always put these training videos with his great skill, but if you don't do it on match day, there's not really much point, is there? So it's after his bust up with Hughes, which is well publicised, he was never going to come back into the fold in the summer. So whilst it's frustrating, I think team spirit is more important than one individual talent, and just trying to get him motivated. You've got, as a manager, you've got to look at a squad of 25 rather than one player. Burnley show that they haven't got any outstanding individuals, but they've got great team spirit, and look where they finished last season. So I think you've got to take that into consideration as well.
Another thing that Nate Dogg kind of mentions is which you mentioned actually earlier, James, is that we still hadn't replaced Mane, and he was really looking for a new winger to come into the fold. He suggested, Sisto, Promes, Bergwijn, Adama Traore, who I think Wolverhampton Wanderers have picked up for quite a sizable chunk of money as well. You kind of nodding your head there. You still don't think that's something that we've effectively replaced. And I suppose with Buffal going out, that's another player who can perhaps be, that pacey, talented player. Is that just a weakness that we have? Or, another thing that Nate Dogg kind of mentions is promoting Hesketh and Sims into the first team squad, which, I'd quite like to see that happen, and perhaps they could answer some of the questions that have been left behind by Mane departing.
Yeah, my biggest frustration of the last few transfer winners has been not replacing Mane. I think it's criminal not to have pace in the Premier League side. Redmond is not a replacement for Mane, in my opinion, at all. We need somebody like... Well, Quincy Promes would have been the perfect solution, but which we were rumoured to in January. That didn't obviously happen. But if you look through our team, where is the pace? In my opinion, that's one of the most important things in the final third, is to have pace. Away from home, we need it on a counter-attack. We're very pedestrian at times, so yeah, I think we haven't had any pace since Mane's left, in my opinion, and that's a big mistake from the recruitment team. Whilst they may have tried to address that, they haven't. And I think Josh Sims has got that pace, but unfortunately, we don't seem to be giving the youth players a chance at the moment, because the Premier League, if you're out the Premier League, we know the financial impact on that. So I think they're worried about that more than introducing players. Like Hesketh, I like Hesketh a lot. It was a real shame he got injured at that time, because I think he was knocking on the front door of the first team. So whether his pathway's been blocked with the new signings, I don't know. But like you, I'd like to see Sims given a chance, because he has got a genuine pace.
Yeah, I'm looking at that first team squad, and I think it's going to be very difficult for Sims or Hesketh to break into it, unless there's injuries, of course. And if you think about probably our most effective counter-attack in the last kind of 2 seasons, it would have been that one that was Josh Sims and Shane Long against Liverpool, 2 players that do have pace. And so, perhaps that's why Shane Long hasn't been moved on by Mark Hughes, despite the fact he wasn't in the first team squad on Sunday. I still think, he can be a useful player at times. Anyway, so we're going to move on from Nate Dogg's comments. Thank you for that. There were a few other people that got in contact on YouTube, but Nate totally dominated that comment section. I think he had about 900 words in his essay. So must try harder, I suppose, for those of you that also want to do that. I'm just going to try and drag up an email in a minute. I seem to have kind of managed to knock that one down. But I have got a suggestion here from a chap called Graham Frampton. He's written in saintsfcpodcast@gmail.com with some song suggestions. Spurred on by your challenge in a recent podcast as to how to rhyme Elianusi, I've come up with the following. And this is to the tune of Oranges and Lemons. Don't worry, I'm not going to try and get you to sing it on the podcast, but so I'm going to have to try, which is going to be embarrassing. Just wait till you see Saint Elianusi. Moyes ball controls, gonna get us more goals. What do you make of that, James?
Yeah, not that I was going to really take off that one, especially after a few beers. I don't think that's really going to come off the tongue. Is it, that one? No, not a fan of that one, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Graham. Oranges and Lemons is a little bit slow paced. So, I mean, that's probably my biggest problem with that. I didn't feel particularly kind of great getting stuck into that. The next one is going to be even more tricky because I don't really know the song that it's supposed to be linked with. Do you know the tune of Scotland the Brave? James is looking rather confused. I look across to him. So I'm just going to read this out as though it's a poem. And, if you know Scotland the Brave, I apologise. My Scottish grandfather's probably turning in his grave that I'm admitting this, that I don't know this. But, Armstrong, he's our man. He's from the Stuart clan. We're all an Armstrong fan. Armstrong's our man. Makes all the lasses stare at his full crop of hair. But men don't care when he nets the ball in there. Armstrong is our man. He's from the Stuart clan. We're all an Armstrong fan. Armstrong's our man. I mean, I suppose probably the biggest positive I can say about this chant is he's managed to get Stuart Armstrong's hair in there, which is probably going to be key for whatever chant we end up with him.
Yeah, but I can just imagine other away fans or home fans saying, what the effing hell is that if we start singing that song, to be honest. So it's probably better than the last one, but that's another no from me, I'm afraid.
Graham, I'm really, really sorry about this. I don't know. I mean, I know you've got one more suggestion here. So, I mean, let's get on to that. James, we'll see if we can convince you with this one. This one's for Charlie Austin. He doesn't suggest what tune this goes to, so I'm just going to have a guess at it. But it's Charlie, Charlie, Charlie Austin, love to score when balls are crossed in, help repay the fee you're costing. So come on, Charlie Austin, score more goals, goals, goals. I mean, I'm sure the rhyme I got totally wrong there. I mean, I tried to be a little bit more upbeat with that one. What do you think, James?
Out of the three, I'd say that's my favourite, but I can't see myself singing that on the terraces, I'm afraid, either. But out of the three, the last one would be my pick if we had to. But I don't think I'll be introducing any of those anytime soon, sorry.
So, I mean, I was sat in the northern end, which always does like a good chant, and I had a couple of fans were trying to sing Danny Ings to the tune of Daddy Cool. So, Danny Ings... Danny Ings. I mean, I could kind of imagine that one working, and it seems a little bit more original than He's One of Our Own, which is what he got when he came on. Have you got any suggestions for new chants, James?
I haven't really thought any, but I think the Danny Ings one that you've just suggested, or the Northern was singing, is it should be. I think, yeah, like you said, One of Our Own is a bit boring, isn't it? It's Harry Kane's song, and it's a bit tedious. So that Danny Ings one is more catchy. I think the shorter the better. Apart from the Ricky Lambert song was a good one, but I think the Danny Ings one is quite good, and it shouldn't be He's One of Our Own.
So Saints fans, listen to this. We're ditching He's One of Our Own, and we're going for Daddy Cool themed Danny Ings. So on to the slightly more kind of serious stuff. So Jason Dickey, he joined us on the podcast towards the end of last season. He resides over in America, but makes a trip out every now and then. He's actually quite surprised by how the Saints fans have been so focused on whether we could get in a new striker. I mean, obviously we've done that with Danny Ings, but Jason Dickey, what I like about his emails, he always kind of like cuts in with a slightly different angle on things, and normally there's a lot of sense behind it. So he was thinking, Southampton should be looking, much more towards the defensive side of things. Quoting defences win championships. And he actually says he's very excited about the future of Hoot and Bednarek. And he thinks, a little bit more good experience, a little bit more focused training, a little bit more focus on the mental side of things. He can see both of those players becoming really good defenders. I mean, does he have a point?
Yeah, I think all good sides, first and foremost have a solid defence. But I still think we needed a striker, and I don't think that's been an issue for a while. So goal scoring last season was very poor. The last 2 seasons, actually, in the Pure as well, was very poor. So I think we did need to bring a different type of striker in with a bit more movement. But he is right in terms of defence. That's where we're very strong under Koeman. Also Pochettino as well. I think we built it from the back. Whilst we did press very well, but our defensive records under Pochettino and Koeman were very, very good, and that's why we saw great finishes within the league. So he is right in that, and I do agree with Hoyt, to be honest, because there's a good player in there. I think his confidence has really been hit last season. I watched a lot of Serie A games, and I was quite impressed when he was at Lazio, and I was quite excited when we signed him. And like you mentioned, John, the Palace game, he was immense. So I think there's a very good player in there. He's obviously played for Holland. He's got the attributes to be a very good centre-back. So, building from the back's good, but I still think we need a striker.
Yeah, and hopefully Danny Ings with his Daddy Cool theme song is going to be the answer for that. We're pushing towards the hour mark now, so I'm going to ditch your suggestion for the fans forum and wait until that's actually happened. I hope that's okay, James. But I do think we should have a short look forward to the Everton game. So Everton away, a fixture that we traditionally never, ever, ever win. Those Saints fans that keep on going up to Goodison Park, fair play. I mean, the stand in there is pretty terrible. You can't really see much of the pitch. I mean, last time I went to Everton was a couple of years ago. It was a dour 1-0 loss and I could barely see a thing. What do you think is going to happen? Are we going to finally break that record against Everton? They've got Marco Silva as manager. They've got their £50 million, 21-year-old Brazilian Richarlison, who played for Watford last season. Obviously, Everton have spent loads and loads of money over the last few seasons, but it didn't work out for them last year. Koeman got sacked and then Allardyce has been moved on. What should we expect next weekend?
Like you said, I've never seen us. I've been to Goodison Park 5 times. I've never seen us win. Last season was probably our closest we've come to winning for a long time. It's a tricky one because I think it's probably a good time to play with him purely because they've had a lot of new signings. It's going to take a while for them to gel. So it might be a good time to play Everton because I think they've made some good signings. They still haven't replaced Lukaku. I don't think Tosin's anywhere near the level of Lukaku. But I'm very, very impressed with the players they bought from Barcelona, Fred, Richarlison. Hopefully he won't have injured against Wolves, so fingers crossed he's not there for Saturday. But I'm going to be a bit optimistic. I think we're going to hopefully get a draw there. And that'll bring us in nicely for the Leicester game. And if you beat Leicester, then that's actually a pretty good start to the season. But I think it's fortunate we're playing them early on with a lot of new signings. And Everton fans do get very frustrated if things aren't going their way the first half an hour, which I've noticed when I've been there. So if we can frustrate them the first half an hour, I think hopefully we can get a good result there.
I think Goodison Park, though, generally is going to be a little bit more optimistic. I mean, the Everton fans were so vocal about wanting rid of Sam Allardyce. So I think it might take us more than 30 minutes to kind of get the Everton fans on the back of Silva and his team. I'm going to hope for a draw as well. I mean, I'd love to say that, we can beat them there. It's not impossible. It's just, a bizarre statistic, I think, because, over many of the seasons that we've been in the Premier League, I think we've been better than Everton. But, it's an interesting, it's an old ground. It's quite close to the players, but that's the kind of thing that old Southampton would have relished. I'm not feeling too hopeful, but, and this is the funny thing, I suppose. You looked at those first 3 fixtures, Burnley, Everton and Leicester, and you kind of feel quite optimistic about your first 3 games. But actually, they're 3 tougher teams than perhaps meets the eye. But it would be really great to have some good revenge on Leicester and Claude Puel next season. And they were saying on another football podcast that I listen to, but I won't advertise on this forum, that apparently Claude Puel's got 3 games to save his managerial career at Leicester, which I mean seems totally bizarre. You'd have thought if they get rid of him, they would get rid of him in the summer. But I mean, perhaps if Leicester are coming to Southampton with a bit of pressure, that could also work in our favour.
Yeah, I heard that too. I think a lot of Leicester fans are very frustrated that he brought Maddison off against United on Friday and didn't play him up top with Vardy. And they're also very frustrated with the football that they play. But if we get a draw against Everton, and there's a bit of pressure on Puel for the third game of the season, and winning against Leicester, it's actually quite a good start to the season. So you've got to be optimistic. So hopefully we avoid defeat against Everton and kick on against Leicester.
So, I mean, you heard it here. We have James predicting Saints undefeated for the first 3 games in the Premier League, and with 5 points after that. I mean, we'll be kind of top half of the table, I think, if we have 5 points after the first 3 fixtures. I actually wonder, I think we might end up with 3 draws from those 3 games. But I still don't think that will necessarily be a bad start to the season. I think really the games that we've got to be winning are going to be against the teams, the likes of kind of Brighton, Cardiff, Huddersfield. I'm not being impressed with any of those in the opening game of the season. They're the ones that I thought would be the main ones for relegation. And actually, having seen Fulham get done by Palace, I think maybe Fulham could actually be another team that we'd be expecting to get points off. So I'm not feeling too pessimistic about this season, but I think kind of mid-table, 9th is probably the higher end of my expectations. I think probably down to about 14th or 15th would be the lower end. You're nodding your head a lot.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think 12th is probably where we're at. There's a lot of worse teams in the Premier League. I think Newcastle are probably going to struggle this season as well. I think Bournemouth probably will. So I think 12th is where we're at. I think with the signings we've made, and we have consistency with the manager for a change as well, because we've had too many changes in that department for the last few years. I think that would put us in good stead for the future. But I think 12th is where we're at with the squad we've got, and if we can kick on for next season. But there's a lot of worse teams us in the Premier League, so fingers crossed we'll make a good start.
So James, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add to the podcast before we say our farewells. Our friend Jason, who emailed in, he had a poem at the end of the podcast. So I don't know if you've got anything like that. All right, then. I think we'll call that a night. Thank you very much for stepping in, James, and coming and joining us on the sofa. For those of you who were expecting Tom Parker, he got sent home from work with the flu today. So, midsummer flu. After all this sunshine and warmth, he can't hack it as soon as we get a little bit of rain. So big thanks to James joining us. I'm sure we're going to have you back on a few times this season if you're still up for it, and this experience hasn't put you off too much. So thank you very much. For those of you that want to get in contact with the podcast, on Twitter it's at saintsfcpodcast. In the email it's saintsfcpodcast@gmail.com, and I also post the episodes in Reddit, the Saints web forum, and of course you can leave a comment on the Ugly Inside channel on YouTube. So thank you very much for listening once again. I've been John Bailey, and thank you to James.
Thank you very much.
Cheerio.